that terrible day when we lost Trent, but then we saved him. So it was all in all, it was an okay day, right? So you're applying the three variable system. You have to write your own system. Now, eventually, you might be thinking about, okay, if I can solve three variables, I can solve four variable systems and five variables. I just have to keep extending this process of elimination. Beyond three variables, I would say, in the real world, if you're working out systems problems, you're probably going to be using some kind of computer program, right? It's going to do all the math for you. I mean, you have to know how to program it to do those types of things. And there's a whole class you can take, probably a whole major you can take related to those programming things and solving systems. And that's actually one of my favorite classes I took in college for my math degree was called maybe it was called operations research, but part of it was linear programming and writing programs to solve big problems. Like, you're going to war, how many troops do you send to one area? Okay, and that depends on a whole lot of different variables. So ours are not as complex as what we might actually see in the real world, but it gives us kind of a base to start with. I don't care, personally, if you write this whole story into your notes. One of my greatest pet peeves on your homeworks is when you have a word problem and I come around to check it and that problem is totally blank. That makes me think that you didn't really read it. Because if I were reading this problem in my textbook and I was actually trying to work it out, I would not want to see all the sentences. I would kind of break down information for myself as I read it, right? So these could be things that you put in your notes. Like, an amphitheater charges $75 for each seat in Section A. So I could write something like, Section A, it's $75 per seat. Okay, so if you don't want to write out the full sentences, you can jot down some of the information that you're being told in the problem. When I see that on your homework as I walk around, that makes me think, even though maybe you weren't able to solve that problem, you actually looked at it because you tried to pick apart what was in it. So think about that in the future whenever you see a word problem. You're leaving it blank. I'm thinking you didn't even read it. Okay? You write some stuff down, and I'm starting to believe maybe you actually tried. Okay, so with your groups, go ahead, read through, copy down information that you need, and you're going to create a system that we can solve to find the number of seats in the amphitheater. I really, at this moment, only care about the three equations. So once you and your group have three equations, you don't have to solve it. If you want to, you can. But I'm going to focus on, can we write the equations? All right, go for it.
Is there three questions?
Austin just asked me if there are three equations. Let's answer that by asking how many unknowns are there? There are three unknowns. So you must have three equations. What are your unknowns?
How many seats there are in each section?
How many seats there are in each section? Okay, so be thinking about that. That's also helpful to create your equations, is to know what your unknown is. I like that.
Can we put it like oh, yeah.
So you guys are using A, B's, and C's, is that
So if we're small, we'd probably do such So do you guys want to solve this?
okay, so what strategy do?
Alright, so that's
So we have one more. And then we can plug it into the top one.
yep.
A plus B plus C. So 55 times 3.
One two. Yes.
Just real quick as I move around the room, most people are choosing, the majority of the groups are doing A, B's, and C's. So they're calling C the group in the lawn. A couple groups are using L's right there, totally fine, it doesn't matter to me. So I'll use C on the board because that's the majority of people are doing, but if you're using L, you're just going to replace all my C's with L's. Don't understand, but well, what's the third piece of information that you have?
Alright, so 1 and 5.
Negative. So we're gonna. So we have the two. We have 4 and 5, right? And so then it's a 2 system. So we have to solve it. That.
But it's 4 times negative.
Yeah, so negative.
C plus negative 248. Yeah, I don't have C. A plus B minus 37. C plus C plus
Negative 690.
how do you wait?
Plus
3A minus C. Oh, no. Hold on. He's broken pencil. Yeah.
Just like a lot of light.
No, the 4.
Yeah, he's the one that won.
Negative. Because it's
Oh.
negative.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring us back together so that we can talk about the three equations, and then we'll move on with our homework and stuff if we're feeling confident. Okay, so this stuff down here at the bottom left, this is just like if I were doing this homework problem, I would write down some of the important information from my word problem. You know, if you're taking the ACT and the word problem is on the workbook and you can write in it, then maybe you're circling and underlining things. But you might want to write it down so it doesn't all look like all those words and sentences, right? You're pulling out important parts of information. And then we kind of agreed, Cole told us, I think, that the unknowns were going to be the number of seats in each section. So it's helpful to keep in mind what your unknowns actually mean as you're creating your equations. That makes it a little bit easier. So let me hear from different groups about an equation that you guys wrote. So Van, you want to pick one of your equations and share it with us? Okay, so look at all the numbers that appear in Van's equation, 75, 55, 30, 870,000. All of those numbers have to do with the same thing, which is money, right? It's all about the money. 75 represents how much I get for every single seat in A. So if I only sell one seat in section A, I only make $75. But if I sell two seats in section A, I make twice that, so $150. If I sell 100 seats in section A, then I'm going to have $7,500. And that'd be good. And then 870 is the revenue that I'm bringing in. So for all the prices of the tickets, that's going to be my total. And I know that it's equal to that. Okay, let's see. Addison, can you give me another equation that your group wrote?
A plus B plus C equals 23,000.
Okay, A plus B plus C equals 23,000. And there you're just talking about
Seats.
the number of seats, right? Which this is the one that I usually see messed up most often because people feel like they have to have these coefficients in there. But remember, think back to what your unknowns are. They're the number of seats in each section. So we don't want to multiply it by 75 because then we're over-exaggerating how many seats there are. A is the number of seats in section A. So it's just those seats plus the seats in B plus the seats on the lawn. We've got 23,000 seats. Okay, any brave groups out there want to tell us their third equation? Zach's hand went right up.
We did 3A equals B.
3A equals B. Okay, so that's coming from the red piece that I underlined. That one sometimes, you know, like when you're at home alone and you're working on your word problem, that's one that sometimes gives like below your radar because the numbers aren't standing out there written as words. So you gotta sometimes reread very carefully what information am I missing from my third equation. The other thing that sometimes gives people pause on that one is should it be 3A equals B or 3B equals A? Okay. If you're ever unsure about which one should get multiplied by 3, I always do this. Reread the statement and figure out where there should be more seats. So there's 3 times as many seats in section B as in section A. Which section has more seats? B. When you read that, it sounds like section B is bigger, okay? So then pick a number. I usually pick an easy number like 10 or something like that. Pick a number and plug it in for one of your variables. So like I'm going to plug 10 in for A because then I just multiply it by 3. And if A is 10, there's 10 seats in A, then there are 30 seats in B. Does that sound like B has more seats? Yeah, so I wrote it correctly. If you miswrote that equation and you wrote A equals 3B and you picked the number 10, you would plug it in for B so that you can multiply it by 3, but then A is going to end up with 30 seats and B would only have 10, and you'd be like, that doesn't make sense. There's supposed to be more seats in B, so I should switch those two variables around. So if you're ever confused by your equation, like does your equation make sense, one of the best things I think you can do is just kind of play around with it with numbers. Okay. Does it actually work? Okay, here's your 3 variable system, 3 variables, 3 equations. All 3 equations don't have to have all 3 variables, like our last one. That's okay. If I were solving this, I'd probably go with substitution. Just plug 3a in for all my b's in equation 1 and 2. And then I would have simplify, I would have 2 equations in a and c, and then I could solve the 2 variable system. We're not going to solve that one because I have faith that you can do that if you've done your homework assignment, page 34. Are we feeling okay with writing the equations? Does anybody have any questions they want to ask before we leave it? You got to be patient with yourself. You got to read. You got to think about what everything means. I know that can sometimes be challenging. I'm going to go ahead and give you the rest of the time to either work back on the previous 34s. If some of them didn't work out for you, we can look at your mistakes, look for your mistakes. Or you can get started on the new assignment. On the homework, you'll write the 3 variable system and solve it, so you'll get some extra practice. These problems also come out to all integers. So that's just a good way for you to check yourself if things are going well. Share a book. Take a picture of a problem if you're going to need that word problem right in front of you.